I think generative AI is super sexy, but from my perspective, that's less than 5% of the overall opportunity.
Welcome to NYC Round, the podcast for curious startup founders.
I frequently find founders being overly reactive to advice and suggestions from their investors.
In each episode, I dive deep into the learnings and mistakes made by the world-class investors and operators who have helped make the New York City tech ecosystem what it is today.
What are the qualities that you find separate exceptional founders from great ones?
In this episode, I talked to Rob Bailey, COO and co-founder of CrewAI, a multi-agentic AI platform. One notable achievement on his packed resume, he played a significant role in helping to scale Customer, a customer support platform that was later acquired by Facebook for $1 billion. We discuss his experience going up against billion-dollar incumbents, the mistakes that can kill startups, and he catches me up on the current state of generative AI.
Rob Bailey, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited for the conversation, learn a little bit more about your background and what we can learn for founders that are listening in today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here today.
Of course. So let's start. Could you give us, for those that may not be aware, the 2-3 minute story about your history and how you got to where you are today?
So I've spent the past 15 years mostly building AI companies, DataSift, Customer, Backbone, and most recently CrewAI, and then a small amount of time doing a bunch of other random stuff in my spare time.
Got it. So Customer, you sold that company for, what was it, $1 billion to Facebook?
Well, I was involved in the early stage for the first 18 months.
Right.
When I joined Customer, it was a small group of 5 guys in a really awful little WeWork office with one printer.
Yeah.
So I joined 2 exceptional founders, Brad and Jeremy, and helped them kind of shift from being a PLG company to being truly a top-down enterprise company.
Right.
That then went on to scale, and after I left, later sold for a little over $1 billion to Facebook.
Got it. That makes sense. So you advise a ton of founders today as an investor. You sometimes jump in on the investments that you make, which we'll get into in a little bit. What are the qualities that you find separate exceptional founders from great ones?
Yeah, it's really been a process of just spending time with lots of founders and seeing what the common characteristics were of exceptional founders, and then conversely, what I saw from founders that failed.
Right.
I would say probably the most interesting thing and common thread that I've seen across exceptional founders is their iteration speed. How quickly do they look at the world around them, look at data, and continue to evolve and adapt their business over time? And when I look at the best performing investments that I've made in early stage founders, that was very clearly a common characteristic. Same's true for founders that have actually joined full time. Brad and Jeremy were fierce and fast iterators at Customer, and now currently working with Joao at CrewAI.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing. He goes really fast and really hard.
So what are the common mistakes that folks can make in the founder role from your observation?
Gosh, I would say, well, probably one of the biggest mistakes is not iterating fast enough, kind of the converse of that.
Yeah.
But I've seen all kinds of other mistakes as well. I mean, a pretty common one is not really listening to customers, and not just what customers say, but what customers are actually doing and how they're using the product.
Right.
I'd say that's a pretty common one. Another common one I've seen is a leader that doesn't do a good job of building a really strong sense of culture and team, which is, I think, really, really important within a company.
What about with talent? Like, what are some mistakes that you can make as a founder with hiring, like your first 10 people as it scales further and further along?
Well, I think it was a partner in Sequoia that said that the culture of any company, or it might have been Vinod that said that the culture of any company typically gets imprinted in the first 60 to 90 days. I'm not sure if it's quite that fast, but I do think that culture and the team kind of blueprint gets set in the very early days. So all hires are important, but I think especially the hires that you make, the first 10, 20 hires you make will really set the path for the company. So I think it's establishing a really clear sense for what you want the culture to be up front, and then making sure that those first 10 or 20 hires are very much aligned with what you want the culture of the company to be.
Right. That makes sense. And then I think you've written about, other qualities that exceptional founders, how they stand out. One of them is the quality of their decision making. Do you have any frameworks on how to make better decisions as a founder, or questions that you ask yourself in that position?
Yeah, I think it's really important for founders to develop their own sense of decision making and judgment. And a mistake that I frequently find founders making is being overly reactive to advice and suggestions from their investors.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that.
Yes, spicy topic. I'll start by saying that I think that you should pick your investors wisely, especially investors that you talk to more often as a founder and that are on your board. I can also say that if you pick well, the investors that you work with can be incredibly valuable on so many levels in growing the business and helping them think through really tough decisions. I've been lucky enough to work with some absolutely incredible investors over time, and they have really given me incredible advice at really critical moments. That said, I do think it's really important for every founder or team of co-founders to develop their own decision-making capabilities where they are always taking in data from the outside, whether it's from investors or from customers or from competitors, taking it in, evaluating it in a very smart way, and then acting or not acting accordingly based on their own decisions. So it's really developing your own unique but really smart point of view that's constantly evolving, rather than just reactively doing whatever some investor may have suggested off the cuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've talked a bit about some of the mistakes you observe with founders. Have you made any of those? Did you make any of those mistakes early on in your journey, or did you make other ones?
Oh, I've made lots of mistakes as a founder and as an early stage builder, and I continue to make mistakes every day.
Right.
And I think what's important, I think if you're in the arena, you're going to make mistakes. And every time you build a company, it's different. And what may have worked for 2 or 3 companies before may be exactly the wrong answer on the next company. So you're always going to make mistakes. What I think is important is to take action quickly. And when you do make mistakes, realize it quickly and correct. I've made the mistake of listening to investors sometimes. So I think, for example, one company that I was working on really needed to be a top-down product. One of our investors pushed me really hard on it being PLG. And we spent a few months exploring that when we probably shouldn't have, given the nature of our customer base. Mm-hmm. But I'll say sometimes I've made the mistake of not listening to investors. And a great example of that was in the early days of Backbone. It was during ZIRP times, capital availability was a lot easier. And our burn was a little too high.
Yeah.
And I had one or more investors tell me that our burn was too high. And I think I listened, but not well enough. I cut burn a little bit, and I should have cut it a lot. And so the investor was right and I was wrong. So, kind of depends on the situation. I think another mistake that I have made, certainly I made it on Backbone, is when I started the company, I did not have a really strong technical co-founder. And
so were you a solo founder in that case?
I was basically a solo founder. I had a really exceptional technology leader who was kind of like a part-time co-founder, but not full-time. And we were trying to solve a very tough technical problem, which was how do you use AI pre-ChatGPT? How did you use AI to ingest, consolidate, and transform very complex manufacturing data for distributors? I started the company with the thought that as we scaled and generated revenue and raised money, I'd be able to bring in a exceptional technical sort of leader / co-founder after the fact. And we weren't. ZIRP times were very tough for finding good technical leaders. And we spent several years looking, and I think it wasn't until probably the 3rd year of the company that we really truly found a good technology leader to really drive product development. And I think by then it might have been a little too late. So I think making sure that you have a technology leader full-time that's a co-founder if you're solving a problem that is, tech heavy.
so fascinating, the patterns that pop up when I'm speaking to different investors and founders. Like I had Ben Zeises on the podcast, super angel. And he mentioned like one mistake he made was like building a software company as a non-technical founder, doing it solo and not having a good technical co-founder.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it also depends on the problem that you pick to solve. And I think one of the challenges that I've kind of realized after the fact is we chose to solve a very, very difficult, potentially impossible problem. And I think you get so fascinated with solving the problem and you get excited about, a tough challenge that sometimes the right answer may actually be don't try to solve this problem.
Yeah.
And I've seen this happen with a lot of founders where they get, really spun up on a problem. They really want to solve it. And sometimes the answer is there is no answer.
Squeezing water out of a rock. It's just not going to work.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you're on the pod today. I'm really excited to chat with you. I've been following you for quite some time, though. You built a pretty significant Twitter following. Has that helped you at all in your journey in tech? Like, how do you think about building a profile as a founder or an operator in tech?
I think there's lots of ways up the mountain. And I've seen founders that have been extremely successful by building a strong social following. And I think some examples of that, I think Joao from Crew just does an incredible job of that. Yeah. And it's just, it's crazy the amount of success, early success that Crew has had at building demand. CrewAI is less than a year old. It's an AI agentic framework. Mm-hmm. And we have a wait list of 19,000 companies wanting to work on our platform.
Right.
And I think there's a few reasons for that, but I think one of the big reasons is Joel's done an incredible job of kind of building in public and using social networks like Twitter, as well as other types of content on YouTube and on deep learning to really generate a ton of demand. So I think one way up the mountain is really to build in public and generate a lot of demand for what you're doing. But, I've also seen other founders that are not active on social almost at all. And I think Brad and Jeremy are great examples, co-founders of Customer. They're not really active on social at all. I do think Customer is. They're not personally very much. And they've been very successful as well. So lots of ways up the mountain. But I think if you're going to do it, I think knowing your audience and putting out content on a pretty consistent basis that is positive, useful, and informative is really important.
Makes sense. So let's talk about Customer. Could you tell us the story of Customer in a few minutes' time, those that may not be aware of what happened leading up to the acquisition with Facebook? Hey, before we get to their answer, I want to take a quick second to just thank everybody that's been a part of the NYC round journey so far. If you've enjoyed these conversations we've been having with investors and founders, like, subscribe, and comment down below. Now back to the conversation.
When I joined Customer, my friends thought I was crazy. I'd lived in San Francisco for more than 15 years, done a bunch of companies there. The last role I'd had was as CEO of a 150-person company called DataSift. And, I had kind of looked around at a bunch of different companies, passed on some really bad ones and passed on some really good ones, including a company that's now called Creator IQ. The CEO there is phenomenal. You are amazing. And I was kind of getting a little tired of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So it all started with me just kind of putting sort of the word out to my professional network that I wanted to move to New York and I was open to anything. So I got a lot of inbound interest. And I think there's 3 companies I was looking at in New York. And probably the earliest, least formed one was 5 guys in a WeWork. Brad and Jeremy being 2 of them. Mm-hmm. It was a customer support software company. And it was probably at the time a very non-obvious solution or obvious answer. And I got to know the founders there. And all 3 opportunities were phenomenal, great founders. Yeah. But the more time I spent with Brad and Jeremy, the more I really got to really enjoy working with them and see the opportunity of what they were trying to build. So I picked up in kind of February, March of 2016 and moved to New York and joined this 5-person company as kind of COO. My friends thought I was crazy.
It's a
I was
huge
moving to
risk.
New York. I would move to New York. They hadn't raised that much in funding at the time. I think they'd only raised, I think, a seed, and had a huge amount of product to build, a very crowded category, very not obvious how there was going to be any winners in a category that was already dominated by companies like Zendesk and Intercom.
Yep.
But I just loved the founders, had a really fun time working with them. And ironically, I sort of said, F it, I don't care if this is successful. I like working with them. I have fun, and I'm just going to go with that. So I ended up picking them out of the 3 companies I was looking at. And it was a very challenging first year.
Yeah. Well, what did they ask you to do? What was your role at the company when you joined?
It varied.
You do many things.
It do many things. What I kind of tell technical founders is I think that the success of a company, from my perspective, the success of a company is based in large part on many things, but in large part on the founder, if they're really good, maximizing the amount of time they're spending on the most important things. And so typically in the early stage of a company, from my point of view, for a technical founder, it's talking to customers, curated customers, so good ones, not bad ones, which is a mistake that founders frequently make, talking to the wrong customers. So talking to the right customers, and a lot of them, building product, and hiring incredible engineers. In my opinion, those are the 3 most important things that a founder should do in the early stages of a company. And so what I typically will joke about with technical founders is I'll do all the other crap so that they can focus on the important stuff.
Right.
And what that means varies tremendously. As an example, with Joao on Crew in the first, I first met Joao 3 months ago at a Bold Start Founder Summit. And 3 months later, we've talked to 200 customers, closed, close to 20 of our first enterprise customers. And it's been nuts. And along the way, it's involved everything from, working on investor decks or investor updates, pricing, go-to-market strategy, customer conversations, building a growth machine, back office stuff like setting up payroll.
Right.
So it's really all the grindy stuff that, in my opinion, is not a good use of a founder's time.
Right. One particular nugget you had in there is about spending time with the wrong types of customers. Are those the obvious things, like making sure you're thinking deeply about your ICP and that this customer or prospect that you're talking to matches it? Or are there non-obvious things that founders find themselves getting into traps where they're talking to the wrong type of customer?
I would say typically early stage founders don't talk to enough customers rather than too many. So one, you want to make sure you talk to a lot of them. And that's one of the easiest ways to make sure you're not getting signal from the wrong customers of what your product roadmap should be. So talking to a lot of customers, but then I do think that a mistake that founders will frequently make is either talking to customers that are too big or too small. So I found that frequently sort of very technical founders like to talk to individual developers and small customers, and that can be not representative of where the revenue opportunity is. I also find that founders will frequently get enamored with the really big names. And so I've definitely engaged early stage with founders where they're, talking to Fortune 500s and they're like, oh my God, it's this great name. And, the investors are on the sideline saying like, oh, great brand names and everything like that. I have typically found in the early stages of a company that talking to what I would call whales are not the best use of all of your time. And I think it's important to talk to some of them to understand what their needs are. And conversations with Fortune 500s with whales take so long that if you want to close them in 6 months, you have to start today. But I think you should probably not expect revenue to come quickly from them. So what I typically will recommend to founders, and then, every situation is different, but what I'll typically recommend to founders is almost like a portfolio approach of your customer base and time, which is you want to have a part of your time spent on whales. So pick the best whales, work with them for a small part of your time, but then spend the majority of your time on customers that can close faster. And to continue the fish analogy, those are typically minnows, especially minnows that have a lot of upside growth, and what I call tunas. which are sort of mid-market companies. Typically, and the definition changes from company to company, but typically a tuna customer is, let's call it anywhere from like 50 to 250 employees, information that's easy to get from LinkedIn. I found that that's kind of, a mid-market, whether it's, the low end is 25, 50, or even 100, and the high end is like 250 or 500. But, in that range, there are companies that are big enough to have a decent sized budget to pay you if they really like your product, but are small enough that they can move really, really quickly.
Right. That makes sense. And when you talk about, customer life-changing exit, you went on to go build other startups and invest in other startups, and then the acquisition happened. But when you look back, are there 2 to 3 things that you think were the most impactful in leading to that kind of outcome?
Yes. One, I think having strong technical leaders and a strong engineering team is very important.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to get acquired especially for a lot of money, if you have a weak engineering team.
Got it.
And I think Brad and Jeremy did an incredible job of building an exceptional engineering team at Customer. And they're really good leaders as well. I would say 2, it's a useful exercise to think about what you're building and how it could be valuable for other companies, and creating optionality in the asset that you're building. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I don't think, what should really drive your product roadmap is what customers want, and potentially your unique insight into how to deliver value to customers. But I do think it's a worthwhile exercise to occasionally think about how could what I'm building be valuable to different companies. And so I think that's probably a second theme, is really think about, okay, if I have this and it's really successful, who would derive value from it?
Does that always have to be like larger companies? You mentioned the tunas.
Well, if you want to get bought for a lot of money, then it has to be a bigger company.
Yeah.
I think there's the twist now, though, that currently the way the government is regulating M&A activity, it could be that it is unrealistic, depending on what happens in November. It's unrealistic to spend a lot of your time thinking about a potential acquisition from one of the biggest companies. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's going to be more mid-sized companies that buy you. So I wouldn't know if I would call them tuna, but let's call it public companies in the kind of $5 to $20 billion valuation range versus trillion-dollar companies. I would say a third, but really important thing, just getting back to your acquisition question, is building relationships with companies. So frequently ecosystem relationships, partnerships, relationships are a great way to start, quote unquote, dating for what ultimately ends up becoming M&A.
Yeah.
And to be clear, that's not an idea I came up with. That's what lots of people smarter than me have said.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. The other really interesting aspect to me of customers that you all purposely chose to build and sell against massive incumbents like Salesforce. Zendesk was another example. What are the keys when you're starting a startup from your perspective, when there's these massive incumbents in the space? How do you successfully navigate that and ultimately find success?
It depends on how good the incumbents are.
Okay.
So when we were in support, in the support category with Customer, the downside is it was a very competitive space. And typically you had companies like Zendesk that were all over the place and had a high level of adoption. And you had companies that were really good at even providing on-ramps to early stage companies like Intercom. Mm-hmm. You also had a lot of more serious later stage startups or stage support companies that were selling to the bigger companies of the world, like, Salesforce, for example. We saw some opportunities. So one, massive category. And I think generally speaking, every company felt like they needed to have support software for their companies. At the time in 2016, when we really looked at the market, in the probably first 8-9 months, I talked anywhere from like probably 500, 800 customers. We talked to everybody. We used every trick in the book to get in front of customers. And we learned a lot. And one of the things that we learned is that even though Zendesk was a fantastic company and, they built incredible momentum in the market, we saw pockets of frustration with Zendesk. Mm-hmm. And we pretty systematically kind of talked to more Zendesk customers to try to understand what those pockets of opportunity were. And we pursued them. And I think some of the pockets of opportunity we identified were what created the initial market opening for customer.
Got it. So we transition then. Tell me about what mState is for those that may not be aware.
So when I left customer in late 2017, my job there was done, in the sense that I'd come in with a team of 5 people, and by the time I left, we'd closed the first 50 or 60 customers. We were top down. We'd put a whole executive team in place. And at the time, there wasn't much left for me to do there. And so I left, and my plan was to go surfing. And that didn't go very far because Ed Sim from Bold Start it was kind of a funny story. Ed Sim from Bold Start had kind of in passing mentioned to an executive at IBM that he was going to do a crypto investment fund or crypto accelerator with IBM.
Mm-hmm.
IBM just went ahead and told the press that they were doing that. So, Ed came to me and said, like, hey, we're going to do this, we've got to do this crypto fund. I don't have anyone to do it. Can you just kind of get it started for me for a month or two? And I said, sure. So I went in, and originally it was called Hyperfab because it was going to partner with just IBM,
mm-hmm.
and it was going to focus on Hyperledger, which to some isn't true, defined as a blockchain in the true sense of the word because it's a closed system, or at the time it was a closed system.
Mm-hmm.
So went in, got started on that, and that ended up going much better than expected, and Hyperfab became mState, and it went from being an accelerator, which we ended up discovering was a terrible idea, to ended up being kind of more of a classic seed stage microfund. So over the course of a few years, we probably, just a team of, at a peak, we were a team of 2, and we looked at probably 1,800 companies.
When I was doing my research, I saw 1,800 companies. Ultimately, there were, I think it was 2 that landed as unicorn exits. It's impossible to predict those things. You can look at predictive qualities and try and make a bet on something. But looking back now, are there qualities or practices that those 2 exit companies had that you think perfectly explain why they had the outcome that they did?
Yes. I'm always surprised once you get into a lot of business situations how you can build basic predictive models, and I wouldn't say 100% accurate, but call it 90% accurate, by looking at 3 or 4 kind of basic characteristics. And what those characteristics are change, whether you're qualifying potential sales leads for an early stage AI company, or you're evaluating investments. You in my experience, you typically start out with a hypothesis of 20 or 30 potentially predictive criteria. And of those, as you kind of go run a lot of data through the predictive criteria, you'll typically find that it's 2 or 3 of them that end up being the truly predictive criteria that are accurate. Mm-hmm. And then you just kind of focus on those. That's something that we've done at CrewAI, where we had a backlog of 17,000 companies, and we've used some basic predictive modeling to identify which are the most high yield potential customers to work with first. And at mState, we did the same thing. It was a crazy time in crypto.
Yeah.
Crazy time in crypto. And my gosh, over the course of a few years, we talked to some incredible founders. We also talked to like a bunch of pretty dodgy founders. So some of the criteria we looked for was, 1, typically very technical. So the CEO of Fireblocks fit that category very well. Mm-hmm. 2, extremely fast and thoughtful iterators. And I would say Michael Shalov from Fireblocks was also that. But then Konstantin Richter from Blockdaemon was probably one of the best iterators I've ever seen.
Yeah.
3rd, team ability to build an exceptional team. And both Michael and Konstantin were very good at that. And I would say we also had a hypothesis set of theses that we laid out. So we kind of just wrote out, it's probably like 30 theories of what we thought would make for exceptional opportunities for investment in blockchain and crypto. And I would say about 75% of them were wrong. Mm-hmm. But luckily a few of them were right.
Yeah.
We deeply believed that crypto was going to go mainstream. I think there's something like 60 million Americans now that hold crypto. And we thought in a variety of different flavors that there was going to be a need for professionally run companies that built the high quality infrastructure for that kind of mainstream adoption. So a few of our kind of ideas around that ended up being really good ones.
Yeah. I was intrigued by something you tweeted recently. It's a concept you called burn smart traction. Could you tell me what you mean by that, and what's an example of when you're upholding that practice and when you're not?
I think to kind of remix that statement would be don't brute force PMF. And I think companies, especially companies that raise a lot of money in a pre-seed or a seed, are often very guilty of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of why you'll sometimes hear experienced investors say raising too much money can be a problem. And there's a bunch of reasons why raising too much money early stage is a problem. It messes with your valuation. You probably hire too fast. But one of the most common effects of raising too much money is I've seen a lot of companies brute force traction. They spend way too much on sales, way too much on marketing. Their unit economics aren't right. And as they start to scale, they just burn more and more money.
Yeah.
I've definitely been guilty of that in the past. And so what I definitely advise founders is essentially just stay really, really lean in the early days for a variety of reasons. But one of them is it forces you to be extremely focused on customer needs, extremely focused on iteration, and pretty ruthless about prioritizing features.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you can't do everything.
You can't do everything, but if you have a lot of money, you try to do everything.
Yeah, it gives you the security that it's like, even if this bet doesn't work off, I have plenty more money to go from there.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, okay, so transition to today, you're part of the CrewAI team. What is CrewAI, and what's the problem you're looking to solve?
CrewAI is a multi-agent orchestration platform, AI, obviously. The problem that we're trying to solve, or I guess the opportunity is kind of more how I look at it, is there is an enormous amount of repetitive, high volume, boring work that today is either done by people or not at all.
Yeah.
And there's examples all over the place, from, building and massaging sales databases to, producing marketing copy to, going out and doing lots of market research and bringing it back and creating reports. There's an enormous amount of work that could be automated. And to date, it has not been fully automated because the technology didn't really exist. I think in a way, RPA did a first pass at automating a lot of great work for people, and great companies like UiPath and Automation Anywhere have had tremendous success doing that.
Yeah.
I think they worked for a range of use cases, but there's still a huge amount of work that needs to be automated. I think you can do some of it with simple LLM queries, and I think we're seeing either companies, essentially building wrappers on top of, for example, ChatGPT or Llama or other LLMs. I think you're also seeing companies being almost like, I would call them full stack LLM companies, where they build their own LLMs that are specially tailored to individual use cases.
Right.
And then they build kind of an application layer on top of their own proprietary LLMs. And I think writer.com is a fantastic example of that.
Are you bullish on that model?
Well, I think it would be hard not to be. I think Writer's going to do an insane level of revenue this year.
Yeah. And
I think their CEO, May, is an absolutely incredible leader. So, yes, I think that some of those companies will survive and do very, very well. But for every exceptional company like a Writer, there's definitely other companies that are not doing such a good job of execution. I think in the case of Writer, they got in really early, and I mean, they've been doing some variation of what they're doing now for a long time, and it's given them a tremendous amount of time to build up their technology. But I think companies that are kind of coming on board now into different markets and trying to be full stack, I think it's going to be tough. And so what I think is probably going to be more likely is companies are going to either focus on kind of a middleware layer and orchestration layer, kind of like what CrewAI is doing, or they're going to focus on being incredible, exceptional applications that fit in with existing workflows. And so I think more of the companies that will be successful here forward, new companies created will more likely specialize in a particular part of the stack.
It's a great segue. Can you help me sort of evaluate the current feeling that there's like a sea of sameness everywhere in AI right now? Like, what is current state today? What are the companies or ways of thinking that you think are going to succeed in the months and years ahead in generative AI and other areas? And where are you bearish when it comes to AI?
Well, I think that the explosion in the number of companies is a feature, not a bug in our industry.
Yeah.
And every time there's a new technology wave, no one has any idea what success is going to look like. And so what you end up seeing is just this explosion of different companies. And I think the bigger the potential opportunity, the more companies you see created. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think that's how you build the future. Yeah. And I think that's what innovation looks like. You have, for every company you have with outsized returns, you have a bunch that failed. And that's okay. And that's just the nature of the way the industry works. And I think that if we had an industry where when investors saw an opportunity, they'd fund 2 companies and then move on.
Yeah.
I mean, my gosh, we'd probably still have MySpace.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I love seeing tons of companies launch. And I think that the opportunity provided by AI, very generally speaking, is so massive. Obviously, I've been in AI for 15 years. And so I've drunk quite a bit of the Kool-Aid. And I would say that the opportunity provided by AI in a variety of different ways is so massive that it makes sense to see a lot more companies being funded and growing into the space and growing within the space. And I think when you see, companies like, OpenAI and what they've been able to do, getting towards $100 billion valuation in less than 10 years, it's insane.
Yeah.
And by insane, I mean, it makes total sense, but it's crazy to think that, a company no one thought would be more than, a nonprofit, is now transforming the world.
Yeah.
And the business world. And so I think that has created a tremendous amount of appetite in terms of funding AI companies. I think we're seeing a lot of stuff, who knows what success ends up looking like. I mean, when mobile apps really started to explode, who knew that one of the most successful apps was going to be something that helped you call a cab,
right,
or a car?
Right.
And, we have Uber. And I think in AI right now, I think we're seeing a lot of it. I think if I would make kind of a spicy kind of comment, I would say that there's too much focus on generative AI. Mm-hmm. And not enough focus on how different new technologies like LLMs can be instrumented as part of a system to do things like, automate back office operations and things like that.
Yeah.
I think generative AI is super sexy. And when you see these incredible generative videos created, they're incredible. And I definitely think that movie making and entertainment content creation are going to be completely revolutionized over the next 10 years. But, for me, from my perspective, that's less than 5% of the overall opportunity.
Got it. One side question. I've actually had this conversation quite a bit with founders that are building in AI these days that I've met here in New York. And one thing I keep hearing from them is building product roadmaps it's so difficult. It's like a months-long exercise, weeks-long exercise versus like the months to years that you had. Like I met several founders this year alone who said, I've already had to burn the ships like twice because either somebody comes up with a new type of learning model or an application of the technology that's like years ahead of ours. How do you even keep up if you're a founder or you're on the team of CrewAI? How do you keep up in such a competitive, fast-moving space?
It's hard.
Yeah.
And it's funny because traditional advice you would give a founder is don't spend a lot of time online, don't spend a lot of time on Twitter, don't spend a lot of time at conferences. And in AI, you kind of have to do all of that because things change so much.
Just to keep up.
Yeah, just to keep up. So I think, one, you need to spend probably some meaningful percentage of your time keeping up with what's going on. and being fluid and adaptable to what's going on. That's probably one. You know, I do think too, you probably needs to spend a little bit more time trying to predict the future. And what I mean by that is, you know, for example, and I think, you know, they've talked, you know, Sam's talked about it, which is you should definitely spend time thinking about things like, what does OpenAI plan to do?
Yeah.
And so for me as a builder in 2024 of an AI company, I think a really important part of what I should do and my responsibility is to be out in the market and really trying to find out what some of the big companies are trying and the fast moving companies are trying to do. And that can create challenges, but it can also create opportunities. And so we have spent a large amount of time trying to forecast where we think OpenAI might go, where AWS is going to go, where Google's going to go, and obviously Microsoft. And that definitely informs how we think of our roadmap.
Yeah, that makes sense. You recently tweeted a question. You asked, what publicly traded company is most threatened by AI? You don't have to say a specific company if you don't want to, but I'm interested, like, what at least industries do you think are most threatened by it?
I would say there's probably, I would say there's a few, and I'll list them, and I will name companies. So one, and just to give kind of a spicy sort of first example, entertainment companies.
Entertainment.
And it's already happening. I mean, you know, when people think of AI disrupting the entertainment industry, they think of generative, you know, sort of text to video and stuff like that. And that's definitely going to happen. But AI is already massively disrupting the entertainment business in ways that I think a lot of people in the entertainment industry don't necessarily fully comprehend. And that's social networks. So, you know, some of the biggest consumers of GPUs from NVIDIA are the social networks. And, you know, certainly a way to look at companies like Facebook and, you know, obviously TikTok are that they are they're AI entertainment companies. And they do an incredible job at creating very addictive content in short form. And so I think you already are seeing AI massively disrupt entertainment because people are spending much less time watching TV or going to movies, and they're spending a lot more time watching TikToks and creating TikToks. And I'm not...
Or unfortunately creating TikToks while at the movies.
That too. And I think that I don't think entertainment companies have fully realized that. And when I look at the offerings from big companies like Netflix and Disney, they don't feel very sort of TikTok and Instagram aware.
Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge. So I think AI is already disrupting entertainment. And I think it's potentially also going to be an opportunity down the line as you start to see a lot more generative content intersect with established IP. Yeah. So a great example would be using generative video to do extensions of established content. So I think people have already shown how you can create your own kind of generative AI versions of South Park episodes. And I would love to see a future where you can essentially create your own version of established content. So I would have loved to have seen a different final season for Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And 5 to 10 years from now, that will 100% be possible. I would love to see another 5 seasons of The Sopranos. That is something that is potentially going to be possible in the future.
Interesting.
But that's one industry. That's entertainment. As we look at how agents or AI agents are being used and what people are building, we're definitely seeing some very interesting areas of use cases. So I don't know if they'll be successful, but we're seeing an enormous amount of innovation happening from early and mid-stage companies around sales software and marketing software. Both of them involve a huge amount of repetitive, boring work. I think anyone that's ever used a CRM has probably wished that there were AI agents that could do a lot of the work for them.
Yes.
And we're seeing just incredible stuff happening early stage. And so I think that big companies like Salesforce and HubSpot need to, I would say, double down on the amazing work they're already doing in AI to make sure that they don't get disrupted over time. So I would say that's probably going to be a second area. I would say another area, and I could go on and on, but I think another area that's going to be very disrupted is going to be offshoring. So you're now able to do a lot of code automation with copilots, and you're able to automate a lot of customer support using AI. I wonder what that's going to do for offshore companies. I don't know.
Are there other interesting use cases for AI that you're excited to see more, adoption or startup founders exploring?
Yes. Tremendous amount. I mean, I personally, just because I spent a lot of time on go-to-market, I am very much looking forward to seeing a lot more innovation in those areas.
Sales, marketing.
So one particular area that I think is really exciting is the creation of synthetic teams. So we're already seeing companies launching. I think Insight actually invested in one that does synthetic SDRs. And I think you're going to see anywhere where you see people doing a large volume of repetitive work, you're going to see that automated with AI.
Yeah, got it.
And so, if in future sales teams, instead of being, 500 people, it'll be 20 people using a variety, operating a bunch of synthetics.
That makes sense. You recently led a masterclass on getting your pricing correct. Are you able to give us sort of the summary of the high-level takeaways from that talk that you gave and any lessons you have for founders that are listening?
Thanks for watching, or thanks for checking that content out. I did it in sort of partnership with Workbench.
Yep.
They are an absolutely incredible early stage fund here in New York, just like Row. And they do a ton of content for the community, which I think the community is really grateful for. And I would say pricing, the TLDR is pricing is super important, and founders typically don't think about it enough because it's outside of their comfort area.
Right.
So they should definitely try to either spend more time on it or work with people that understand it, like outsource CFOs. Right. Some of the 2 or 3 kind of key learnings. One is iterate very fast. 2, deeply understand your customers and how they want to pay, because they may sometimes surprise you. And the third kind of key lesson that I would say is deeply, deeply understand your unit economics. Because I've frequently seen things like people offering unlimited amount of, volume, not realizing what that's going to do to their AWS bill and things like that. So deeply understand your economics, which not sexy, but very important.
On that note, are there, you advise hundreds of founders. What are other mistakes that you see startups that kill startups as they try to scale?
I'll talk about something that's kind of controversial. I think a lot of founders struggle with the balance between having an environment that is super positive, very employee-centered, very diverse, very inclusive, with also having a company that goes really hard where people work long hours and, it's kind of a more hardcore or almost like sports team type of environment. And I see a lot of founders struggling with that. And I would encourage founders up front to think very carefully about what kind of a company they want to build, what kind of a culture they want to build, et cetera. Are they going to be a company that only cares about results and wants people working long hours on the one hand? And there have been quite a few companies that I think have succeeded doing that. Or on the other hand, are you going to have a company where people work 9 to 6 or something similar, take a lot of vacation time. You don't email after hours. You don't talk, no work on the weekends, and you spend a lot of time talking about culture and happiness. There's lots of ways up the mountaintop to be a successful company, but I think sometimes founders don't explicitly think about what kind of a company they want to be.
Got it. Makes sense. Well, this is NYC round. I'd love your take on the New York City tech ecosystem. I know you went out to San Francisco recently and you kind of tweeted about that experience, but what do you think about New York today and where you think it's heading in the next 5 years?
long NYC,
Yeah.
very long NYC. And I'll tell you why. I mean, if you just look at the numbers, the Bay Area still gets the lion's share of funding, especially later stage.
Yeah.
I would say that if you're building a hardcore deep tech company, especially in AI, Bay Area, just looking at the numbers, no opinions, just looking at the numbers and the amount of funding, the Bay Area is still number one.
Yeah.
But what has been fascinating for me is to watch the incredible growth of New York City. I wanted to move to New York City long before I actually did.
Yep.
And the reason why I didn't is because people told me it would be career suicide. This is back, kind of 2014, 2015, even in 2016 when I moved here, people said, oh my gosh, this is going to be terrible for your career. And luckily, they were wrong.
Yeah.
And I think it's been absolutely incredible to watch in the past kind of 7 or 8 years, the incredible explosion of the tech scene in New York City. I mean, New York City used to be, the tech scene in New York, back in the days of Silicon Alley, was ad tech. It was content and maybe some social stuff.
Yeah.
Like Tumblr. And to watch this incredible explosion of enterprise and B2B in New York City has been amazing. I think if you want to balance a bunch of things together, just in terms of total volume of funding, Bay Area is number one. But if you want to balance a combination of where is it a great place to build a career and build companies, where is it a great market to be surrounded by lots of potential customers that aren't necessarily other tech companies.
Yeah.
Where do you get exposed to folks from a ton of different industries, from fashion to real estate to technology to financial services? New York has an incredible diversity of industries, which I think makes it a richer place to be. And I would say on a social level, the social life in New York City is, fantastic.
Right.
And I mean, there's great culture. It's very international. It's very, very diverse, not just ethnically, but, along a bunch of different waves.
Industries.
So I love New York. I think it is the best city on earth to be building a tech company in 2024.
Amazing. Well, on that note, Rob, thanks for joining me. I learned a ton during this conversation and appreciate you taking time out.
Thank you. Rose, a great fun. And I'm psyched to be here today. And thank you very much for having me.
Thanks.